Alright guys, now that you've taken a look at those examples, let's take a look together just to make sure that we are good. For this first example here, it says find the measure of arc AC. Hopefully by now we're comfortable with if we have an inscribed angle, its measure is half of its intercepted arc. So to get to this intercepted arc, I really am going to need to take 2 times our 70. This is only half of it. I need to double this to be able to get the measure of that intercepted arc. So the measure of arc AC should be 140 degrees. Okay. Moving right along, the next one said find the measure of the arc and the angle. First we're finding arc QS. Notice that we have a central angle. Its vertex is the center. That central angle is 130 degrees. Well, that intercepted arc should be exactly the same as the measure of its central angle. So the measure of arc QS would be 130. Well, when I look at angle QRS, notice now we've got an inscribed angle. That measure should be half of its intercepted arc. So half of our 130 is equal to 65. All right. Moving right along, the next one told us to go ahead and find the measure of the angle. So take a look here. We've got angle ABE first, ABE. We know that it is an inscribed angle because it's got its vertex on the center, or on the circle, not center, on the circle, and we know that its intercepted arc is 90, so therefore it's half of that, and half of 90 would equal our 45. So it's a 45 degree angle. Now, ACE, notice that this angle also intercepts the exact same arc, and it's also an inscribed angle. So therefore, we know that it's also half of 90, which would also be 45. And ADE, hey, take a look at that one. Who would have thought that it also intercepts the exact same arc, and it's an inscribed angle, so it's also half of 90, which is 45. Hopefully this gives us a clear picture of that theorem that you took a look at to say that if 2 inscribed angles of a circle intercept the exact same arc, then those angles will be congruent. Same thing is true for 3 as well. All right. Next one said, what is the measure of angle C? Now, we knew that the measure of angle B was 44, and we know that angle B is an inscribed angle. Well, look at angle C. It's also intercepting the exact same arc as angle B was. So because B was half of this measure, this had to have been our 88, C would have had to have been half of that, which would have been right back to 44. As long as they are intercepting the exact same arc, these angles should be congruent. So the measure of angle C should also be 44. All right, moving right along. Look at this. We've got a triangle that's inscribed in my circle. All of its vertices are on the circle. And we know that one of the sides of my triangle is the hypotenuse of my, or I should say, it is a side of my, the diameter is a side of my triangle. Well, if I take a look, I could look at just this this inscribed angle, and that inscribed angle, if I look at its arc, if that is a diameter, this arc is 180 degrees. Well, that means that this has to be 90. So we really have a right triangle. Anytime that you notice that you've got a triangle that's inscribed in your circle and one of its sides is the diameter, that means that this has to be a right triangle. So 3x is equal to our 90, which would be, again, half of that 180. So then we know that x would have to be 30. And that's all we had to do there was find x. Okay. We looked at a theorem that said if you have a quadrilateral that is inscribed in your circle, meaning that all of its vertices are on the circle, you really have 4 inscribed angles that form this quadrilateral, then we know that the measure of each one of those inscribed angles and the angle that's opposite that inscribed angle, so these 2 opposite angles here, should be supplementary. Again, together their 2 arcs would equal 360 degrees. Since inscribed angles are only half of the measures of their arcs, these 2 together would equal 180. The sum of them would be 180. So let's write our system. Going with our 2 opposite angles, we've got a 22x plus 19y is equal to 180. And the other opposite angles, we could say that a 40x plus a 10y would equal 180. All right, we've got our system of equations. Now, it does not matter to me if you want to use substitution or if you want to use elimination. Either one should be perfectly fine here. Looking at this, it would not be very hard to get this y by itself because these are all divisible by 10. So I'm going to go ahead and use some substitution on this problem, but you could use either one. I know a lot of you guys seem to be fans of substitution when we've done systems before. If I divide everything here by a 10, as long as, again, I divide each term, that division property of equality says that it will still be equivalent, then I'd end up with a 4x plus y equals an 18. And to get the y by itself, we're going to go ahead and subtract our 4x, so y would equal a negative 4x plus 18. All right, now that I know what y is, let's go ahead and put this stuff in place of y in the equation. So 22x plus 19 times the quantity of a negative 4x plus 18 is equal to 180. All right, as we distribute, we have a 22x. This is going to be, minus, since we are taking a positive times a negative 76x plus 342 is equal to our 180. And as you go ahead and combine some like terms and move your 342 to the other side, you'd end up with a negative 54x is equal to a negative 162. And if you divide both sides by negative 54, x is 3. Now, that's great. I know what x is. That will help me to figure out what the angle measures with an x are. So I know that this angle 40 times 3 is going to give us our 120 degrees. And we could go ahead and take a look at this one. This is going to be a 10 times 3, which would be a, that's a y. Hello, there's my other x. 22 times 3 is going to be our 66 degrees. So there's my two angles that we know for sure. Now, to find y, once I know what x is, not too hard to find y. We knew that y was equal to negative 4 times x plus 18. So y is going to equal negative 4 times 3, since I know x has to be 3, plus 18. And that would give us a y value of 6. So if y is 6, now let's figure out our y values. Here we go. 10 times 6 would give us a 60-degree angle. And 19 times our 6 is going to give us 114 degrees. And if you check, we know that all of the sum of all of those interior angles should be 360 degrees. So you can go ahead and check that as well.